The Royal Tribune was a ghost paper, which is, it still lives. We call it a flag, the name at the top of the paper. I don't think they had a staff. I think the Oakland Press fed them stories. Press and Guide I'm not as familiar with. I imagine some of the cultural changes in Dearborn did not help there. But there are tons of news sites out there. I run a student investigative reporting program called Eye on Michigan, and we provide investigations to news outlets throughout Michigan that are free, high quality, and all of my students have jobs in the media. There was a kid who graduated from the state news a couple of years ago, and I was trying to get her to talk to our editor. That's a pretty big deal when somebody says, hey, talk to my boss, I want them to talk about hiring. She never came and made the appointment because she got hired by Outlier for $73,000 coming out of journalism. I didn't make $73,000 in my first 3 years in journalism combined. And we have reporters, great reporters in Premier Beats who don't make that kind of money. There's Planet Detroit, there's the Michigan Enjoyer where LaDuff works, there's all sorts of nonprofit news from Bridge Detroit, Bridge Michigan. So there are a lot of news organizations out there, but the traditional news outlets, the news, the free press, WGR, WWJ, the TV stations, we are losing staff, which is a problem because we are the ones who have the experience. We're the ones who have the know-how. We're the ones who have, frankly, the platform. Now, I'm sure I mentioned a lot of news organizations you've never heard of. And that's a problem, because no matter how good their work is, if you don't see it, it doesn't matter. And I've never had somebody come up to me, no disrespect to these people, and say, did you see the big story in Planet Detroit? So the mainstream media is important just because we have the trust, we have the know-how, and we still do hire. But there are lots of jobs in non-traditional media, and kids are studying journalism, they're getting these jobs. So as that nonprofit world continues to grow, maybe the scales tip a little bit.
Okay, when I talk to my students at Wayne County Community College, first of all, I asked them, how many of you voted in the last election? None of them did. None of them did. And they said, why? It didn't count. It doesn't matter, I guess, is what they say. And they're separated from this. And I said, well, where do you get your news? I start off every class, what'd you see in the news, what'd you see in the free press, what'd you see in the legacy media? None of them had any idea. Now they're starting to read it because they know I asked a question, okay? But none of them read it. And so where do they get it? Social media. And I had some clients, and I was just amazed at the ability of the social media and what he was able to do to reach out and to touch certain nerves that I never even thought of. But he was able to do it, and he was able to, have narrow slices of people and objects that he wanted to touch versus everybody else. Everything's socialized now. Everything with partisanship is much more distinct, and it's unfortunate, but I see a lot of these major legacy medias just going under.
Again, I miss that connection it brought me. And yeah, the Royal Oak Tribune had been stripped by, its corporate owners. But when these little papers were owned and published, we have a former Royal Oak Tribune publisher in the room. Wait. And he can tell you when they were locally owned or better connected to their communities, they provide a valuable service. I get the local paper from my hometown in Kentucky every week, and it comes. Is it great newspaper? No, it's pretty basic, bottom level journalism, but it gives me information that I find useful and connects me to the community. And I fear we're losing that connection to our communities when we have no place to go to figure out, well, whose house got broken into last week, and what's this Sheetz gas station controversy all about? We have no way of getting that information in these local communities. Now, the big communities like Detroit, as ML served, there's tons of nonprofits being funded to serve those communities who who's funding nonprofit journalism in Westland or Livonia or, you know, Royal Oak? Those people are gonna be less informed and less connected to their towns than they were before.
There's a food chain too. When I was the Macomb County reporter for the Free Press, there was the Anchor Bay Voice, and they would report on everything. And then the Macomb Daily would see what the big stories were in the Voice, and they'd report on those. And I'd see stories in the Macomb Daily that I thought were interesting, and I'd report on those. And then the Washington Post would see what I was reporting on and report on those. And then, you know, we lose those people on the ground. We lose the people, and as a publisher, you know, you can't reach our publisher. I've never met our publisher. But if you run into Wayne at the Hollywood Market and you got a problem, you have a direct connection and you can influence the news. He may not bend to your will, but he's got to take that into account when he's talking to his team. Losing these small papers is the beginning of the end for democracy, but I don't know how we save them.